On the 22nd of April 1993, Stephen Lawrence was murdered at a bus stop near his home in London. He was black. The resulting case resulted in continuous headlines, but failed to achieve a conviction in almost 20 years. Police handling of the investigations led to permanent and serious damage to race relations, especially in London. A review into police corruption in the original murder investigation revealed a Metropolitan Police spy worked within the Lawrence family camp during the judicial inquiry into matters arising from Stephen's death. The Metropolitan Police had already been accused of institutional racism in an earlier inquiry, causing major reform of the justice system in England and Wales. So, how do the public feel about the police and racism? Do they think the problems have been solved? And what do they think needs to happen next? In your view, which British state institution would you most associate with institutional racism and why?
I think the police kind of just have a bad rep about them, especially to do with the Stephen Lawrence case. And yeah, it sort of sticks in my mind when you say about racism.
I think probably the justice system, just after I read a book at GCSE about racism towards the Irish in the 80s, and that really gave me like a sort of raised a few questions for me about whether that's still alive today and stuff like that.
When you hear the phrase institutional racism, what body would you associate that with?
I think, well, when I do think about institutional racism, I do tend to think about the Met Police. I think there are pockets of racism within the police. I think things will have to change, but yeah, it would be the Met Police that I would think of.
Through my own experiences, school, university and general workplaces. Sometimes it's really casual and it's sort of like glazed over, and sometimes it's a lot more blatant.
Goodness, I think the first thing that comes to mind is the police, just in terms of free association. Specifically in terms of the phrase, I guess, probably not conscious building in of racism, but you know, through various processes, racism becoming like a mainstay within any given institution. So I mentioned the police, universities, schools, just about, you know, the way things are done, you know, and what's accepted, yeah.
So clearly the public do associate the phrase institutionalised racism to some extent with the police. We turn to our experts to understand why that might be.
I think the institution that's most associated with institutionalised racism is a tie between the Metropolitan Police and the British Immigration Service. Both are renowned within minority communities for levels of institutionalised racism and cases where those subject to arrest or intervention by police or immigration service claim to have been subjected to appalling levels of racism. So I think because of consequence of their institutional power to deny somebody their liberty and deport people in terms of the immigration service, the police and the immigration service would have to be the two institutions, in my view, that have the most longest history in relation to institutionalised racism.
The British institution that's most closely associated with racism in the UK just has to be the police. And that's come about predominantly because of the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence 26 years ago. Year after year, more news comes out about the Stephen Lawrence killing and the fact that the police were actually actively covering up the corruption and the racism involved in his murder. But day in and day out, people's experience in London of their contact with the Metropolitan Police is finding that there's racism and racist conduct from the police. There's one case just shortly after the London riots in 2011 when a young black male was arrested by a Metropolitan Police officer. During his transport to the police station, the police officer made some very serious derogatory comments about that young man. Fortunately, he recorded it on his telephone. But The CPS, the prosecutor here, which works in tandem, it seems, with the police, wouldn't prosecute that police officer for that racial conduct. It was only until The Guardian published the audio recording of that interaction between a police officer and a young black male before there was a prosecution of the police officer, which would suggest that the prosecutor is working in tandem with the Metropolitan Police, or the police in the UK, to cover up corruption also. So it's only the exposure in the media that is actually bringing about prosecutions of racists who work within the Metropolitan Police.
Next, we asked the public if they felt that the Metropolitan Police did represent the ethnic diversity of the city, or whether it continued to be a primarily white establishment. Here's what they said. Do the Metropolitan Police in London represent the ethnic diversity of London, or would you tend to regard it still as a largely white establishment?
I would say that actually I'm currently living in White City, and it does seem to be quite ethnically diverse actually in who's been taking on, especially with regard to community support officers as well. I see that increasing. Nevertheless, I don't think it should necessarily be, people should be employed depending on their race. I'm not sure that's necessarily the right way to go about it.
So far, all the police I've seen have been white, so I guess that answers the question.
I definitely perceive the police as a largely white establishment in London, yes.
Why is that?
Just from experience of what I've seen walking around the streets, I don't really see much diversity in the policemen that I see on an everyday basis.
I think they do. I think in certain areas they do, but certain areas they don't. Like, it depends where you go. Sometimes you see all just one colour police, and then sometimes it's very diverse.
Do the Metropolitan Police in London represent the ethnic diversity of London, or is it still largely a white establishment in your view?
I don't think it's predominantly a white establishment. I think they've got a lot of racially diverse officers at the moment, at least that walk in the streets that I can see. But I don't know how far that goes up the ladder, if you see what I mean.
Well, you don't really see a lot of Asian or black officers, do you? Walking the streets. You do see them, but not in the proportions that relate to the amount of people that live here. So, yeah, I don't think much has changed, to be honest.
Not really. Just from my own experience, I've seen lots of sort of ethnicities represented and lots of people with that. So no, I wouldn't feel that strongly about that. No, I wouldn't feel that. No.
So, varying views from the public there. We turn to our experts to understand the facts behind the actual ethnic diversity in the Metropolitan Police and why the perception might be different.
The UK British Police forces don't represent the diversity of the United Kingdom, and in particular the Metropolitan Police Service doesn't represent the huge diversity that we can see in areas like the capital city. And for a long time there was very slow progress being made in terms of achieving that representation. But now we've gone into a reverse where the cuts to police services means that we're actually seeing a net loss in black and ethnic minority officers joining police services like the Metropolitan Police Service. And it's fundamental in a democracy that a police service must look like the people it served. And at the moment, in areas like London and the metropolitan areas of Birmingham and Manchester, we're seeing police services that are predominantly, overwhelmingly white.
London's a really rich, diverse city. It's full of cultures from all over the world, and I think that it works very well. But there's not really a police force within London that reflects the community that it's supposedly serving. The Macpherson report in 1999 recommended that diversity within the police should be improved and that the police should start to reflect the community that they are policing. And it just hasn't happened. The levels of ethnic minority police officers are still low in the police, and you only have to look at the higher ranks in the Metropolitan Police, where the top tiers of the police are white, male predominantly. And another thing that's very, very interesting about policing in the UK on a wider sense is that every single one of the police and crime commissioners which came into the UK 2 years ago are all white individuals. There is not one ethnic minority individual as a police and crime commissioner in the UK today. And that has to reflect on the society that is not allowing minority individuals to rise up through the ranks and to reach those higher positions.
It has been said that the reputation of the police has taken a knock in recent years. Is this the case, and if so, why? we invited the public to give their views and their reasons. How has confidence in the police been knocked over the last few years from what you've seen in the media, for example, or perhaps direct experience?
I haven't had direct experience myself, but I think, from the media, and I think a lot of people have lost confidence, particularly a lot of black people lost confidence in the police. And I think there has to be a lot of relationship building with local community. I think the police really need to do some work in terms of their recruitment, in terms of going out into the community and rebuilding an image. I think there's some work to do still.
I have no stories from my friends, only from what I've read in the newspapers. And there's been the scandal in the police. So
I think people feel like the police are kind of controlled by government, and politics. They're not really there to serve people who live here all of the time. I'm not saying that they don't do good things, but a lot of the time I think they are sort of directed by other bodies, that have their own interests. So a lot of people, I think, feel like that.
I think it's been strengthened. I think although a lot of people coin PCSOs as plastic policemen, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think there's been a great community build between certain groups within London. You look at the amount of knife crimes that have been in there, they've gone down. Other areas of crime being tackled at the moment, and I think the Metropolitan Police are quite healthy currently at the moment to move forward, really.
We turn to our experts for an insight into the real facts behind the reputation of the police and why it's changed across recent years.
Confidence has been knocked in the police over the last 3 years through a litany of complaints. We've had police officers calling young black boys who they've arrested niggers. We've had deaths in custody which are highly contentious and suspicious, like Mark Duggan, like Smiley Culture, Kingsley Burrell and a number of others. And we've had evidence after evidence of corruption in relation to spying on the Lawrence family, in relation to the mass shredding of documents at New Scotland Yard that looked into and recorded evidence of corruption within the Metropolitan Police Service. We've got institutionalised corruption and institutionalised racism, and those concerns and those perceptions of communities have been dramatically reinforced over the last 2 years as we've seen case after case revealing an appalling level of police professionalism and an appalling level of racism directed at African, Caribbean, Asian, Muslim communities in the United Kingdom.
Confidence in the British police right now in 2014 is at an all-time low. There's no question about it. There was a survey about 1 month ago which said, do the public believe that there's a culture of cover-up in the police? 53% of the British public said yes, they believe there's a cover-up culture in the police. And day after day now we're getting massive scandals breaking about the police. And I think that any culture within an organisation that permits cover-up permits racism to flourish. It's the same ingredients that will allow these type of things to grow and affect what should be a good organisation. It should be an organisation that serves the public, the British public, and it's just failing to do that. There are decent officers out there who are just plainly being failed by the fact that their corrupt and racist colleagues are allowed to continue in the organisation and damage its good name.
A major review into the Stephen Lawrence murder investigations revealed the fact that the Metropolitan Police had placed a spy in the Lawrence family camp during the inquiry into Stephen's death. We asked the public how they felt about that. A major review into police corruption in the original murder investigation found that the Met had actually placed a spy to work in the Lawrence family camp during the inquiry. How do you feel about that?
It's difficult. It's horrible, especially when you think about the family, and I would hate to have that happen. If one of my family members were murdered, and, to have someone sort of spying on us. I just think it's pretty disgusting, actually.
I feel like that isn't reliable behavior because your police should be an unbiased source of justice as opposed to working inside jobs that the public isn't aware of.
I mean, it's an allegation and a rumor, but so far I've studied that in class, and that sounds horrible. That the police would spy. I don't know how that could get past. If that happened, how did the citizens find out?
Well, of course, it's an intervention in people's privacy, and it's a recognised tort. It's unlawful. The question is, did they get any authorization? I don't think it's a good thing to have. I think they can get information otherwise. That's it.
A major review into the Stephen Lawrence murder investigation actually revealed that the Metropolitan Police had placed a spy in the Stephen Lawrence family camp during the inquiry. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think it's terrible. I think, I mean, this may be actions of police officers and senior members of the police, back then, but that does nothing to help the image now. And I think unfortunately there are probably still people like that around within the organisation.
I think it's really terrible. I mean, if that is a true investigation, I think they really need to do something about it, and they need to show the public and especially the ethnic minority groups that they are tackling this, and they need to prove it as well, and make sure that all the information and investigations to actually deal with that is available for everyone to look into. It's really important that they gain everyone's trust again.
Yeah, well, that's obviously a massive betrayal of trust. I wasn't actually aware of that. Obviously, that's a massive betrayal of trust. That's going to lose a lot of confidence and stuff. I don't imagine necessarily widespread through the institution, though. I still wouldn't believe that they're institutionally bad. I'd say that must have, I don't know, if that is true, then that I'd imagine was a one-off minority sort of thing. I wouldn't tarnish the entire organisation with that.
So by and large, a very negative view of the fact the police inserted one of their spies in the Lawrence family camp. We invited the experts to comment on what looks like an extraordinary and surprising police tactic.
My reaction to the news that the Metropolitan Police had actively spied on the Lawrence family to get information to smear them and their campaigners was one of anger, but not surprise. I think that it's completely unethical for the Metropolitan Police to have engaged in that sort of abhorrent behaviour. I was one of the people who was spied upon. I was one of the people who was giving evidence at the Lawrence inquiry, and along with the Stephen Lawrence family, we were subjected to police covert surveillance that amounted to an unwarranted intrusion on the attempt of the Lawrence family and their supporters to achieve justice. The police should have been monitoring the criminals, not the victims of the crime, in this case the Stephen Lawrence family and their supporters. So I was very angry, but I wasn't particularly surprised.
The Stephen Lawrence revelations that are coming out right now, some 26 years after his death, I think are absolutely shocking. There's the allegation that there was a police liaison officer who was within the family trying to assist that family through the trauma of what happened to them, yet was spying, or allegedly spying on the family and feeding information back to the Metropolitan Police so that they could protect their reputation. And that's absolute damning indictment on the Metropolitan Police that someone at a senior level would take such a decision to do that. One of the key findings of the Macpherson report was to provide police liaison officers to families who've suffered the trauma of some sort of racist attack or whatever it is, because of course it heightens, it's traumatic to be involved in assault or something criminal, but it's heightened if there's racism behind it. How can the British public, who are subjected to issues of racism, trust the police now that the police liaison officer who's supposed to be there to help isn't actually spying? I think it's absolutely damning. I think the police need to sort themselves out and try and regain the trust of the British public.
Many people have said that they regard the police as institutionally racist. We asked the public if they agreed, and if so, what should be done next? Looking at all the information and what you've seen and heard, do you feel the police are institutionally racist, as has been suggested? And what should happen next generally?
I don't think I could possibly answer that question, because my personal experience hasn't led to any indication of that. With regard to what's been reported in the media, I think it's very difficult, because you get some areas within London, for example, that have much higher crime rates. So it's inevitable that, say, stop and search will take place in those areas more where there may be more people from different ethnic diversity. So it's very difficult to pin it down. I think more transparency would just help everybody. although I can understand with issues of national security that could be a problem as well. So.
I'm not sure. I haven't felt any racism, so I can't answer that question.
I definitely think that they could be institutionally racist, but it would be important to take steps to boost their public image by resolving this problem through maybe recruiting more diverse officers and interacting with more facets of the public.
It's what should be done in everyday life, really, and it should start from schools and education. And I don't know, I was brought up in Liverpool, where it's not really diverse where I live, and never really experienced anything. Everyone was just taught to be a nice person. So with regards to the police force, I'm not entirely sure.
Put the ethnic diversity in the center of the police, maybe employ more people, like just to show it that they have nothing as anyone. And I think that's the image people have. It doesn't have to be necessarily the problem in the police. So maybe change the image of the police.
So what can be done about institutional racism in the police? We gave the last word to our experts.
The question of whether the Metropolitan Police Service is institutionally racist is one of which is concluded in the mind of the public. I think the vast majority of us do believe, particularly within black communities, but not exclusively, that the Metropolitan Police Service has in fact become more institutionally racist than they were even in 1993. And as a consequence, we're seeing discrimination and disproportionality in the exercise of police power. And what this means in a democracy is that black citizens and white citizens receive a different type of policing. And black communities are criminalised through the use of stop and search and disproportionate charging of black and white individuals by the Metropolitan Police Service. So we've got a process of racism that is leading to a process of criminalisation, and that gives rise to the solid accusation that far from being a post-racist organisation, British police services are now more racist than they've ever been.
The McPherson report in 1999 called the Metropolitan Police institutionally corrupt. Not much has changed since then, but what has changed is that of recent times, commentators have suggested that the Metropolitan Police is institutionally corrupt. It's the same ingredients that allow both to flourish. The fact that the Metropolitan Police has this massive propensity to cover up the crimes of its officers, be it racism, be it criminality, be it the corruption that flourishes within their organisation. Something has to change, and it has to change now, because the trust in the police is at an all-time low with the British public, and it has to stop. I'm encouraged to hear that the Home Affairs Select Committee very recently has said that they're going to hold an inquiry into the Metropolitan Police. And let's hope some of these things come out and there's some drivers for change within the police. And hopefully, if you stamp on this corruption cover-up propensity, then it will help with issues of racism as well, that they will not be covered up as they seemingly have been done in the Stephen Lawrence case, when we're getting revelation after revelation still coming out.
The police have many outstanding officers in their ranks. However, some have failed to live up to the high standards expected of them. And despite repeated calls to deal with institutionalised racism in the force, they still have to prove they have permanently changed. Until they do, they will continue to be distrusted by many of the very citizens they are duty-bound to serve.